It's Friday, May 1st. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. There's a Highrail truck coming up the rails. There it is. He's out there in the rain. He even waved. Yeah. Another rainy, gloomy day. Well, first one that I'm hearing today, coming down through the valley. Try to see what time it is. I got about 1 minute to 11. 10:59. I hope this is in the Hustling. There's the backhoe over there today. That's better. Hustling pretty good. Wonder how fast they're moving. My father worked on the railroad. Engineer for a few years, then yard master. Now, when I'm going back 40 years, he said there used to be signs up with numbers on them, and that was the speed limits the engineers had to follow. That's not something I see around. I don't know if that is still a thing or not. But this one is hustling. Nice long one too. Flat wheel or flat spot on a wheel. I think they're slowing down some. I'm actually surprised I haven't seen a helper in the middle somewhere. Indeed, slowing down. For where I live, Keysport just outside of Pittsburgh. Where's their yard big enough to pull a train like this in as one long train? I don't know. Well, that's the end of that one for right now. It was raining earlier. It's all cloudy. Yet if you turn around, sun's peeking through. So maybe it'll be a nice day after all. I'm hoping.
Here's the real problem. They're aborting piglets right now. They're causing the sows to abort. And so the animals that would be going into the pipeline, that would be showing up in your supermarket in a couple months, aren't being born. So it's not just a problem at the processor now. The farmers are responding rationally to their concerns that they'll have to euthanize more hogs. By the way, there are slaughter-ready hogs that are being euthanized, shot, destroyed, and buried.
The same with cattle. If it's not happening on a mass scale,
I turned this on just for people to hear.
Happening on a mass scale, to where they're just chickens, cattle. They can't process them, and so they have to kill them and bury them. And this is not good.
That's right. It's already it happened a few weeks ago with chickens. It's happening with hogs this week. We've got more leeway, a lot more leeway in the cattle market. By the way, I raise cattle. I have 60 head of cattle.
Yeah.
I took 2 of them to a processing facility yesterday. Rookie, sorry.
Yeah.
And so I took 2 to the processing facility yesterday, and where I saw something I've never seen before. There were dairy cattle being hauled to the processing facility for beef.
Wow.
And so, because whenever they take cows out of the dairy production and turn them into beef, that also has a long-term effect. And but that's just farmers responding rationally to what they're seeing, which is prices. When you saw the price of oil going negative, we're there with slaughter-ready hogs. In certain circumstances, there are these processing facilities that are canceling their contracts, claiming act of God, to the farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyways, I saw this coming. I was on your show, like you said, weeks ago, talking about this. When I saw the milk being poured out, I said, you know what? Mm-hmm. They're going to be pouring out animals, too. And it's one thing.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's one thing to watch milk being poured out because everybody spilled a glass of milk. It's another thing to see 1,000 pigs piled up in a pile that are going to be wasted.
So, Thomas, this is really something. I mean, this happened in the Great Depression, and the government was actually paying for people to destroy animals. That way, they could drive the price up, and it was a nightmare. And it happened in the Soviet Union as well, and it leads to famine in countries that are not as sophisticated as ours. And we're gonna have famine all around the world. And the United States, Brazil, and Canada we provide 60% of the meat for the rest of the world. When we look at these slaughterhouses or processing plants, the problem is that you can go down to the processing plant and you can have your cattle, butchered. The same with me. I do it locally because I eat my own beef. And so we can do that, but you can't have a local processing plant, which are great, actually provide that meat at the grocery store, which is what we should be doing. It should be local. I mean, every environment.
You're going to have.
I stopped this, but I hope they tell you.
Where
they're talking now about how much of our meat processing plants are owned by the Chinese.
And then at the supermarket, there's a shortage of pork just a few miles away. While there's a processor, a local guy, who, it can do your deer if you shoot one, if you shoot a deer, or you can do your cattle if you're just selling it to your friends and family and they have ownership in the cow. And so what I recognized is 5 years ago, Glenn, and I introduced a bill called the Prime Act. And everything's a ridiculous acronym in Washington, D.C., so I was compelled to come up with an acronym that makes PRIME, the word prime. And don't laugh, but it stands for Processor Revival, Intrastate Meat Exemption. And at the time, I was like, well, who would ever care about reviving the processors? Well, the processors are shutting down. And so I think right now, this week, people understand we need to revive the processing. And it's going to become more acute when you go to the supermarket. It's going to be like Soviet Russia. You're going to go to buy chicken wings, and they're going to say, sorry, no chicken wings. Take a pound of chuck roast. And so we won't have famine here, because what will happen before that happens is we'll be importing meat. The poor countries will realize, you know what, we can eat beans and rice, and we'll sell our beef to the Americans.
Yeah.
And that's already starting to happen. We're getting meat from like Africa or somewhere, and we can stop all this nonsense.
Crazy.
If we would pass the Prime Act. Here's what it does. It's real simple. It says if you've got a farmer and a processor and a grocery store and a consumer who are all in the same state, as long as we're not crossing state lines with this transaction, as long as everybody is abiding by state laws and state regulations in that transaction, then the USDA can't put a farmer in jail for selling a hamburger to somebody.
This will never... You know this as well as I do, Thomas. This turns the Commerce Act back on its head, back on the way that it should be.
Yes.
They, in the Great Depression, they turned it upside down. This would turn it right side up, and the federal government will never, never give in to that. Never.
There are two groups that are opposing this. Obviously, the lobbyists in D.C. that represent the big meat packers. Okay, that's one big group. But also,
which is it's corrupt. The meat industry is absolutely corrupt.
And some of these organizations are disguised as farming organizations that are supposed to represent farmers, but they're actually financed by the processors. And I can tell you, they flip the table on the farmer when they get to Washington, D.C., and they act like they're representing the farmer, but it's all about the meat processor. This is why they got rid of country of origin labeling on beef and pork 5 years ago. And you had the farmers who were against getting rid of the country of origin labeling. If you're an American farmer, you want your stuff labeled in the supermarket.
Right.
But if you're a meat processor, you should be just as happy to get that animal from Mexico, grind it up, put the USDA label on it, and sell it in the supermarket and have people think it was made in USA.
Okay, Thomas, let me ask you this question. Are you introducing this bill again?
Yes. In fact, I introduced it last May. I had, before this week, I had 24 co-sponsors.